As the moon began her sleepy descent, and the sun stretched his morning rays, the black earth that was once the gray house of Griffin Drive trembled. Long, spindly, ashen fingers clawed their way through the desecrated soil, pushing up, 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 with arms reaching heavenward until the tips touched the sky. The great tree grew until it towered over the warm White House and drowned it in its ominous shadow. I had just stepped out onto the porch to breathe in the crisp morning air when I noticed the monstrosity of a tree that had seemingly appeared overnight. "Luke! Charlie!" "Shush, woman, you'll wake the boys." Luke was always a little grumpy first thing in the morning. "Too late." Charlie yawned as Rory tumbled out the door and leaned into his leg. Dante heralded his awakening with a loud and long wail. "There's a tree!" Luke looked at me like I had two heads, while Charlie rubbed the sleep from his eyes and grumbled, "It's a branch." 3 pairs of eyes turned to Charlie incredulously. "What?" "That," I pointed at the giant ash tree inhabiting our previous address, "is a tree." "It's a branch." Luke looked from Charlie to the tree to me. Wasn't expecting that to grow there. "Well, where the hell did it come from? What is it?" It's a branch, they said in unison. Rory giggled. I could have killed them both in that moment, but my boiling frustration and fear were extinguished when I caught a glimmer of sorrow in Charlie's unfathomable eyes. He knelt down to Rory and ruffled his hair. Pulling the small boy close to his chest, he nuzzled him gently and kissed his forehead. I'd never seen Charlie that affectionate. He stood and looked at me with pain-filled eyes. And I can't be here for this." Just like that, he vanished, leaving me to deal with what was to be the most devastating events of my life. Rory spent the rest of the morning casting death glares in my direction. Any time I spoke to him, he'd huff and puff and turn his little button nose up and stomp away. He figured it was my fault his Charlie left. Luke spent his morning bouncing his half-son Dante and making vroom noises while he taught him to smite the wicked. Dante responded by smiting our noses with foul smells leaking from his diaper. Of course, then Luke would say, "It's mommy time," and thrust my sweet boy into my arms. Just before lunch, Mamoru appeared with a frustrated Kit. "It's not right. I don't like it. It shouldn't be here." Her soft voice rose to an almost comical pitch. "This is a place for all things lost and forgotten," Mamoru's rumbling voice chided her. "Or those who wish to be forgotten." He eyed me. "I see you have new neighbors." "You mean the tree?" He chuckled at me. "Look again." I raced to the porch with Dante in my arms. The towering ash was breathtaking. Even redwoods would be dwarfed by its size. Fine green moss clung to its scarred bark, making beautiful swirls and patterns upwards. A patch of ethereal pearl gray snagged near the base. As I went to inspect the tree closer, Kit ran out and began circling the tree, snarling. To all our surprise, she ripped off her binding mask and growled. Her true form pulsed with angry energy. All 9 tails fluffed and hackles raised. The small scar shone, a soft pink star between her eyes. Her voice gravelly and low. "What do you want, witch?" Humph! A willowy woman shimmered into existence. Her pearl gray dress caught on the bark. "Do not posture at me, child." She reached up onto her tippy toes and flicked Kit right on her nose. "I am what shall be, and have no time to play with you." Though her accent was thick like honey, I understood the golden words. "Scoldie dear, don't enrage the sweet darling." Another woman with hair the color of flaxen wheat appeared from behind the tree and stroked Kit gently. Kit shrunk down, holding her nose in her soft paws, eyes filled with suspicion. "Have you tangled yourself again?" said a third as she leaned down and unplucked the stuck fabric from the tree. "Always a bit dramatic, aren't you?" "Don't patronize me, sisters." She yanked her skirt away and patted it down. Scoldy turned and stroked the tree bark, leaning close to inspect it. "What has he done?" she moaned. The other two frowned. All over the tree, carved deep into the bark, were thousands, if not millions, of names. Some were fresh. The tree still wept from the scarification. I reached my hand out and touched the bark gently, tracing letters and runes. "What is this?" Rory parroted my concern. "What is this?" His eyes wide with fascination as he reached for the tree. "Don't touch!" Scoldy slapped at his hands. "You've done enough." Now, Scoldy, what's done is done, and that's easy for you to say, Ed. You are what once was, and are always looking back, never forward. "Scoldy, Ed, let us not fight in front of the children. You shall frighten them," the third chided and shook her head. Against Kit's wishes, I invited the three women in for lunch. They introduced themselves as Erd, Verdandi, and Skuld, dwellers of the well and shapers of destiny. As soon as they mentioned that they lived in a well, all I could imagine was grumpy Scoldy crawling out Samara style. Her long pearl-white hair, damp, clumped with moss and well goo, dripping over her face. It took everything I had to suppress a giggle. Erd was the eldest of the sisters. Her flaxen hair was braided in a crown around her head, with the long tail of the braid trailing down her back. She was the yang to Scoldy's yin. Where Skuld seemed to fret over every decision, Erd would brightly comment on past decisions and how Skuld should use them to help her make future choices. "After all, if we don't learn from our mistakes, we are doomed to repeat them." "Doomed! Doomed!" Scoldy yelled, pointing at Verdandi. "If you had any impulse control, the fates would not be furious. Death would not be on a rampage, and we wouldn't be here." Verdandi simply chuckled at her unbalanced sister. "You need to learn to live in the moment, for the day, by each breath. By that I mean, breathe, dear sister, breathe. It is as Erd says, what's done is done. I was tricked by the boy's smooth words. You lusted after him. I thought he truly wished to learn to weave." "Enough!" shouted Erd. For the first time, she dropped her nonchalant facade, her brow puckered in worry. "There are greater things at stake than Dondi's virtue or your ego." Scoldy sulked, casting a death glare at any who caught her gaze. Dondi blushed. Mamoru cleared his throat, while Rory hid his face in Kit's shoulder, trying to avoid Scoldy's wrath. "So," Mamoru looked into his tea, "we actually stopped by because a new shop opened up in town, and we wondered if you'd like to check it out with us." It wasn't the kind of store I would usually browse, but it seemed to have caught the eye of the entire town. It smelled of tobacco, leather, and a heady, thick scent I couldn't quite figure out. The shelves and displays of the crowded shop were filled to the brim with every kind of clock and watch imaginable. I couldn't figure out why a town like ours would need such a niche store, but it was something new. If you've ever lived in a small town, you know everyone rushes to be the first to see the new and exciting thing, so that they will have the best front porch gossip. I was examining a beautiful sand hourglass when Dante let out a piercing cry. He was struggling in a stranger's arms. The man's wizened face was set with two gleeful, if not slightly mad-looking, deep-set onyx eyes. Bushy white brows seemed to float like clouds above his alarmingly widening eyes. His crazed grin was nearly hidden by the thick mustache and long salt and pepper beard. Spittle flew from his mouth, catching in his facial hair. "Oh, come now, little man. There's no need for you to fear Mr. Time." He bounced Dante, who only squealed and thrashed harder. Only his struggle could be heard in the tomb of a room. The lights in the store dimmed and crackled. Dante screeched, and the bulb in a nearby sconce popped. His pupils dilated as he sucked in air to scream again. The cosmos began to swirl in their obsidian pools. I snatched my boy back. The static-charged room filled once again with the sounds of people excitedly exploring its treasure troves of time. The strange man leered at me. "Quite the powerful air you have there." Clocks began to chime the hour, the cacophony rising to a crescendo, nearly drowning out his next words. I could swear I heard, "In time he will be mine." The walk home was broody and pensive, for me at least. Luke had claimed I was being dramatic, that Mr. Time and his store, once upon a time, were both charming and a bit eclectic. Rory rode Mamaroo's shoulders, babbling about clocks and sending sideways glances in my direction. He still wasn't ready to speak to me. All night I dreamed of clocks and Mr. Time. In my foreboding dream, Mr. Time would be holding my Dante. Clocks would swirl around us. I was running out of time. No matter how fast I ran, I couldn't reach the old man holding my infant son. Mr. Time's evil laughter echoed around me as they got farther and farther away. "Moira." I had to run harder, faster. Dante was crying. He needed me. I couldn't let the bad man take him. "Moira, it's okay." Mr. Time lifted Dante high into the air, his mouth opening wider and wider. I had to be faster, but I couldn't breathe. My breath came too short and too hot. I looked down, and a clock was wrapped tightly around my ribs, pulling, pinching, tighter and tighter, like a corset. It crushed my ribs together. "Moira, I can fix it." Mr. Time's jaw unhinged and dropped down to his chest as he shoved my tiny son into his gaping mouth. Dante's feet kicked and thrashed until they didn't anymore. I woke up with a start and a gasp. I sucked air into my lungs like a dying man claws at life. My sheets were slick with sweat and stuck to my body. A gentle hand touched my shoulder. "It's okay, Moira. It was a nightmare." The familiar voice washed waves of relief over me. I looked up into the shadowed eyes of the beloved man sitting on my bed. "Uncle Roar?" He smiled at me and chuckled. "Shush now. Everything will be okay." He pushed the damp hair from my face. "Go back to sleep. I won't let anything hurt you." The moonlight peeking through the window glittered in the lone tear that slowly ran down his smiling face. He kissed my forehead, and I fell into a deep, peaceful slumber. I awoke the next day to the soft sounds of clinking silverware and plates. Hushed voices downstairs and the fragrant aroma of bacon, pancakes, and coffee told me I had overslept. I poked my head into Rory and Dante's rooms as I trudged past. Neither were in their beds. "Luke?" I was almost to the kitchen when a loud knock sounded at the door. I altered away from delicious foods and towards the impatient person announcing their arrival. "Moira, you're up just in time for breakfast," Luke called from the kitchen. I unlocked the door and grabbed the knob. "Are the boys down here with you?" I swung the door open. Mr. Time stood awkwardly close to the threshold, a bright smile plastered to his lips, the warmth of which did not reach his cold eyes. "Good morning, ma'am. I came by to apologize for startling the young one yesterday." He thrust a beautiful wooden box at me. "Who is it, Moira?" I blinked a few times and stared at the man at the door. He brushed past me and into the house. It's Mr. Time. Luke popped his head out of the kitchen with an eyebrow raised. I noticed you admiring that yesterday. Mr. Time looked around the room as he gestured to the box in my hands. I thought I might bring it to you as way of an apology. I slid open the box. Inside, beautifully arranged in a bed of crushed black velvet, was the hourglass and a small note. Your time is short. Use it wisely. Is that a threat? I asked, memories of the nightmare flooding my body with adrenaline. What? Oh, no, my dear. His smile turned sneer-like, and a speck of hate sparked in his eye. Of course not. Luke came out of the kitchen, followed closely by Rory. Rory was starting to look so much like Uncle Roar. I guess that meant he resembled our grandfather. I could feel the corners of my mouth begin to turn up in a small smile. Well, good morning, Mr. Time. Would you be joining us for breakfast? Mora, can you go get Dante? If we don't wake him up soon, he'll never go down at nap time. The blood froze in my veins, and my chest constricted. Mr. Time licked his foul lips in anticipation and looked at me gleefully. I shivered involuntarily and forced my body to turn towards the stairs. Maybe Dante was curled up under his covers, and I just hadn't seen him. Or maybe he was in the bassinet instead. Or the swing. My fingers grazed the smooth wooden banister, and I heard the wood box containing the hourglass crash to the floor. It was like trying to swim through mud wearing a lead bathing suit. I tried to breathe, but it only came in short gasps. There was no oxygen left. That awful man had sucked it from the room. 1 step, 2 steps. Had the stairs always been so high? The dream rushed back. No matter how fast or far I ran, I'd never reach my Dante. He's gone, darling. At the top of the stairs stood Verdandi, long flowing fabrics that draped her body swirled around her. The world was water marbled from the tears I was already crying. I opened my mouth to beg her to say it wasn't true. Behind me was chaos. Someone was shouting and feet were thundering in my direction. I was roughly shoved to the side. Mr. Time ran up the stairs, barreled past the stoic Dondi, and into Dante's room. Where is he? Where is the child? I seemed to be stuck to the stairs. My body was melting, and soon I would become one with the earth. The weight of her words dragged me down, suffocated me with their truth. What have you done, you wretched witch? Mr. Time was shaking Verdandi. Her soft, pale eyes never left my own. I taught someone to weave, Cronus, and weave they did, she said softly. Someone was wailing. Rory was clinging to me, scared and not understanding the gravity of the situation. Scully pulled me into her arms and forced me to look into her eyes. She slapped me once, and the wailing stopped. Oh, it was me. It was supposed to be mine, Mr. Time growled. Eating children never did you any good, Cronus, Erd spat at him. There was a loud crash in the kitchen. Luke's hands were balled into tight fists, bacon and shattered plates strewn about his feet. He glared towards the front door, which still hung wide open. A tall, masculine woman stood, blocking the entrance. The sisters gasped in unison as the woman strode into my personal hell. The muscles in Luke's jaw pulsed as he ground his teeth. Her hair was jet black and slicked back when she pulled off her fedora. She clasped the hat over her heart and gave a short nod in Luke's direction. Where's the brat? A Boston accent wove neatly through her words. Luke began to snarl, his lips pulling away from his mouth, revealing teeth all too sharp. The woman turned to me. Her impeccable pinstripe suit seemed to suck all the light from the room. She clenched her teeth. Fury shone brightly in her eyes. I won't ask again. Luke rushed at her, his wings ripping through his shirt, teeth bared, claws out. He was thrown through the air and into the wall with a flick of her wrist. Rory screamed for Charlie, but receiving no response, he buried his face into my chest. "You can't have my son!" Luke pulled himself from the rubble of what once was my wall and spat a mouthful of blood out. She looked at him in amusement. "I'm not here for Dante. It's not the child's time. I'm here to teach a lesson." A bloody rage glinted in her eyes. No one moved. No one even breathed. "You don't fuck with death."